Amtrak's Coast Starlight is a long-distance passenger train running between Seattle, Washington, and Los Angeles, California. Running daily as train number 11 southbound and number 14 northbound, the train completes the 1,377-mile journey in 35 hours and traverses nearly the whole length of the West Coast. Major cities the train serves include Los Angeles, Salinas, San Jose, Oakland, Sacramento, Eugene, Salem, Portland, Olympia, Tacoma, and Seattle. The train usually consists of two General Electric P-42 DC locomotives for power, followed by a baggage car, 2 to 3 sleepers, diner, lounge car, and 2 coaches. In the past, the train has been pulled by P-32-8s, F-40PHs, and older equipment. The Coast Starlight's origins can be traced as far back as the 1920s. In 1922, the Southern Pacific Railroad introduced the Daylight Limited service between San Francisco and Los Angeles. A second train, the Cascade, was created in 1927 and ran between Oakland and Portland with connecting service to Seattle. The Daylight Limited was rebranded as the Coast Daylight in the late 1930s, and a second train, the Noon Daylight, was added to the same route. These trains used the famous GS-class locomotives that every SP fan will recognize. Southern Pacific prided themselves with their new daylight service, and the train was painted in a bright orange and red paint scheme as part of the rebranding. As time went on, SP switched from steam to diesel on its passenger services, including the Daylight. The Noon Daylight was eventually rescheduled to run at night as the Starlight, and was discontinued and combined with the Lark in 1957. In the late 1950s and throughout the 60s and 70s, railroads across the U.S. experienced a sharp decline in ridership. Passenger services could not sustain themselves financially, and the expenses related with their operation drove several railroads into bankruptcy. Railroads were forced to cancel, replace, and discontinue passenger services nationwide. The California coast was no exception to the purge of passenger trains. In 1950, Southern Pacific operated at least 7 passenger services between the San Francisco Bay Area and LA alone. The Coast Daylight, Coast Mail, Starlight, Lark, Owl, San Joaquin Daylight, and Tehachapi. By 1969, however, only the Coast Daylight and San Joaquin Daylight remained, the others falling victim to an increasingly inhospitable market for passenger trains. By now, the Daylight was just a shadow of its former self. No longer an orange and red streamlined train, but a hodgepodge of whatever equipment was available. In 1971, to alleviate the financial pressures on the freight railroads, the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, more commonly known as Amtrak, was created by the federal government. Amtrak would take over passenger services as a separate entity, partially funded by the government. Amtrak canceled the San Joaquin Daylight, leaving the Coast Daylight as the only passenger train between the Bay Area and Los Angeles. The Coast Daylight was combined with the Oakland to Seattle Cascade and was rerouted through Oakland. The train was renamed the Coast Daylight/Starlight and was expanded south to San Diego. In 1972, the San Diego extension was dropped, and the train was renamed the Coast Starlight in 1974. Since 1974, there have been few changes to the Coast Starlight service as a whole. By far some of the most notable changes have been in the route the train takes. Today, the train operates on the tracks of the BNSF Railway from Seattle to Portland, the Union Pacific Railroad from Portland to Moore Park, California, and Metrolink from Moore Park to Los Angeles. Two major route changes have been made. In 1982, the train was rerouted from the Southern Pacific West Valley Line to the Western Pacific Valley Subdivision, and later the Southern Pacific Sacramento Subdivision, adding service to Chico and Sacramento. In 2021, the train was rerouted over the ex-Northern Pacific Point Defiance bypass south of Tacoma. The Coast Starlight's daily service has remained more or less unchanged since the 1970s, but there have been minor service adjustments due to outside factors. Service was severed between Klamath Falls and Dunsmuir by the lava fire in June 2021. Eventually, service was suspended between Sacramento and Seattle entirely, but full service would be reinstated in late August. Service was also reduced to tri-weekly service due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Changes to connecting services have been the main focus of Amtrak and the state governments since the 1970s. Corridor services such as the Amtrak Cascades, Capital Corridor, San Joaquin's, and Pacific Surfliner have given riders more connections to other cities. A Coast Starlight passenger can now take a connecting train to Vancouver, British Columbia, Bakersfield, California, or San Diego, California. In addition, the train connects with long-distance trains in Seattle, Emeryville, and Los Angeles. One planned improvement is to introduce service to Soledad and King City on the Coast Subdivision. Various groups have also proposed restoring Coast Daylight service between San Francisco and Los Angeles as a separate service. Amtrak's Coast Starlight has had a tumultuous history. From the beginnings in 1937 to today's modern Amtrak service, the Daylight and Starlight, in all their iterations, have become a well-known service on the west coast of the United States, and will continue to do so for years to come.